So yeah, just the desire to say, you know what, I'm going to do good in this world. And it's going to start with taking care of my body, taking care of what I put in my mouth, taking care of what I put in my ears, taking care of what I put in my eyes, taking care of the media that I'm consuming on a regular basis. Because you're right. There's a lot of people who are just like, you know what, I'm just cannot deal with this time of my life. So I'm going to medicate it. I'm going to zone out. I'm going to drink a few beers. I'm going to just watch Netflix. I'm going to, in worst case, go and get into porn or, to satisfy something. And none of it actually satisfies anyway. But when you learn to control the senses, control the mind, and dial in that you actually have a higher purpose, and that aging becomes graceful and beautiful instead of like a curse, then the whole yoga system starts to make sense and the whole thing starts to blossom.
It's awesome to have you. Thank you for joining us. As I mentioned, Larry and I both picked up your book last year, and we were really touched and blown away by your story and your journey and your path. And I think specifically, we got excited about the idea of having somebody come on the podcast and talk about spirituality, which I think is something that's for many people hard to get into, but particularly guys, and especially guys that we are trying to target or get engaged with yoga, who are guys in their 40s and 50s and 60s, making the turn in life. So we're familiar with your path and experience, but if you could just take us back a little bit with your connection with yoga from a spirituality standpoint and really what hooked you.
Okay, great. I tell a little bit of the story. I tell the whole story really in my book, Punk to Monk. Because I just liked alternative things growing up in a monocropped culture of Connecticut. When I was a teenager, I got turned on to New York City, which was like an hour and 10 minutes away on the Hudson Metro North train. I had older brothers and sisters that lived in New York City, so I would just go visit them on the weekends and I would just explore. And that was early 80s. And the 80s in New York City, it was a little lawless, It was like, what was that, Scorpio, that movie, or right? It was like that. It was a little lawless. Serpico, not Scorpio.
Yeah,
Serpico, that's right. And so where you have corporate rock and corporate clothing and corporate, arena rock, where I was growing up here in New York City, you could go to clubs and see alternative music, alternative bands, alternative people, alternative clothing, alternative foods and diets, and then also alternative spirituality. So I had an interest in everything not like how I was growing up. So New York City ended up feeding me that. And I was in a punk band, and I ended up moving to New York City when I was 19 with my hardcore band Youth of Today. And the band was really into like what I was into healthy living and clean living. And this is back before it was hard to find a vegetarian restaurant, and before there were any vegetarians or vegans. You had to go to a place like New York City where there was like a few health food shops. And so healthy living, and truthfully, I got into alternative diets. And so I started getting into Ayurveda, there was one book on Ayurveda at that time that was out in English. And so I randomly met a Ayurvedic doctor, which was, only in New York City, and like especially like the Lower East Side, that was like the real alternative everything. And I liked the idea of Indian spirituality because it seemed very inclusive. It didn't seem like it damned other religions. It basically said that, everybody's spiritual, and different masters and different teachers come to sort of uplift society and bring people higher. And I thought, you know what? That's what I want to hear. I don't want to hear about condemning. I don't want an authoritarian idea of a higher power. I believe that everybody's spirit, and it sort of resonated with who I already felt like I was. And so then I started to find these weird alternative bookstores that had bookstores on paranormal and witchcraft and spirituality and metaphysics and Bhagavad Gita and Tibetan Book of the Dead and Jonathan Livingston Seagull and just, and diets and fasting and stuff like that. And that was sort of my fascination. And I will say these wisdom literatures ended up fueling a lot of my lyric writing because I felt like these are timeless things. Wisdom is timeless, and therefore I wanted to write songs on self-improvement, which in itself was a very peculiar thing in the punk rock scene at that time. Punk rock was really finger pointing. It was blaming the government or blaming society. It was blaming everybody but themselves. So the band developed a big following quick because it was unique within that world. Like, we were into clean living. No one in the hardcore scene in New York City in 1985 was into clean living. It was a huge drug scene in New York City. And so that was the band sort of blew up, and I sort of dove deeper into these spiritual books. And it's the spiritual books and the Ayurveda that dragged me to yoga. It wasn't even health. I was already sort of into health and biking and sports and wrestling when I was younger. But it was sort of like I wanted to understand the spirituality behind yoga. And so I was working in a vegetarian restaurant at the time. And a lady in the restaurant said, who was my girlfriend at the time, just said, you should come to a yoga class. And my teacher's really cool. And that was the first class I went to, I think in 1987. It was Dharma Mitra. And I remember Sharon and David used to practice next to me from Jiva Mukti. And there was like 2 yoga schools and 3 yoga schools. And back then they were all inspired by some ashram. It wasn't like Core Power or Yoga Works. It was just like ashram oriented yoga. And it was okay because I really wasn't in yoga, I'm famous for handstands and, sort of extreme sports yoga. But that's not why I got into it. I got into it for wanted to understand Indian spirituality better. And so that was my probably launching pad. And I was young at the time. I was probably 17 or 18.
So was this more of a curiosity thing, or was it already the beginning of what you referred to in the book as a God-shaped hole in your heart?
It was a curiosity thing, but it was a God-shaped hole. But because I was so interested in music at the time, there was no urgency. And it was only due to the success of the band, which made me lose faith in material success. Because that's a religion. Like a religion of, if I can get rich, then now I'll be so, grounded and centered and whole. And it's only when like these things that we lean into fall apart and crumble that we realize, is there more than this? So the success of the band mixed with the untimely death of my father was something that sort of was a springboard for me to go deeper into my spiritual life. So at first it was sort of a fancy in my mind and interesting. I find this interesting. I find this, but it definitely wasn't like, I want to move away and join an ashram. But by the time I hit 22, that's exactly where my head was at. That it was like, there's nothing of this world that I'm interested in. And I just want to understand who I am in relationship to God.
It seems like, obviously, because I've been a musician in the past and I know a lot of musicians and whatnot, you're on that train of like trying to make it. It sounds like the closer you came to making it, whatever anyone's definition of that is, but you guys got pretty far into it, the more you sort of pulled back from that to go on this path. Yeah.
It was one of these things that it's not like I ever became, Paul McCartney.
Right.
But we started getting big enough where we could tour anywhere, in Europe or America. And if I was in Milan or if I was in, Miami, there'd be, 500 kids that could sing all the words to our song. So it was just enough that I realized, like, big deal. Like, big deal. It's not like I might have got fame. I might have, like, impressed more people. More people may have heard my music. But I felt like in my heart of hearts, like, I haven't changed. I haven't become a better person. I haven't become, because I'm reading these books about enlightenment and reading these books about self-realization. I'm reading these books about coming to some inner peace. And I was like, I'm not there. I don't know why these people are looking up to me. I'm saying really pedestrian things about clean living that's a threshold to something much greater. I'm not even there at all. Why are these people looking up to me? And I realized, like, and truthfully, from the beginning, it's not like there was like a monetary metric like I wanted to get to. I just liked music because I thought it could spread a good message, a positive message. But I never set out like at a young age, like a lot of people do. Like, and there's nothing against that, because some people are just like, I'm a musician and I want to be in a band. I was never like that. I was just like, I think it's sort of cool to get up on stage. I like to perform. And so I went off track a little.
Well, this might kind of get us back. I have a tough time remembering the whole arc of the timeline from the story in Punk to Monk, but it sounds like there was a fair amount of time, maybe a few years, where you were kind of wrestling with a little bit of, should I stay in music? Should I be fully devoted? Sure. Do I feel authentic and genuine trying to be this devoted person, devoted yogi? Help remind us a little bit of like the arc of those years, and kind of how you evolve from a spiritual sense as far as committing to the path that you were starting to scratch.
Okay. Yeah. What happened was, as I started climbing that ladder of whatever success it was, there was also other things. It was the 80s in New York City, so breakdancing was blowing up and hip hop was blowing up, and there was like this cool alternative music scene and nightclub scene and street art and graffiti and Keith Haring, and it was just like everything. A lot of creative energy concentrated in one place on the Lower East Side. And so you sort of, Madonna was there, the Beastie Boys were there. Then I saw the Beastie Boys, because the Beastie Boys were like a hardcore band, and just like peers. And I watched them blow up in 1986, maybe, and I was going, wow. But when it finally came to this next stage, I started thinking, and now they're even bigger than that. Like, is that going to fully satisfy them? Like, at what level of fame will it take to feel like I am whole, I'm connected, I am enlightened? Fame can't be what makes it, because I'm already headlining over bands that I looked up to. I looked up to a bunch of bands, and now I'm playing over them. So should I just go higher? Is that it? Do I keep running full speed down this dead end? That's how I felt. I was like, they're just farther down the dead end. So I could do it. I could probably shove more money in my, pants pockets. I had a record label at the time. I signed 20 bands up to this time. But I'm just like, there's no end to that race. And so I think I felt, and then when my father during the time of that band, my father had slipped into a coma. He got sick and he slipped into a coma. So for about 3 years, he was in that coma, and it was a very, very difficult time to try to, truthfully, to make heads or tails out of it. I didn't quite
out of your spiritual journey, right?
Out of what's happening to him. Is he
alive?
Is he dead?
Yep.
Should I just sit by his bed? Does he ever come out of that? Or is it a dead body that's breathing? Or is he trapped within his body? And, I think I mentioned in the book, it's like in a humiliating way, I couldn't deal with it. I didn't know how to even process it. And so my mother just sort of gave me blessings to figure out my own life. And so I didn't really even have time to really grieve what was going on. And there was always sort of hope he might come out of it. But to make a long story short, he left his body. And when he left his body, everything was sort of coming to a head. And that finally pushed me. I'm over the music. And I'm over, because, sometimes when we see a person die, we feel bad for the person, we feel bad for the loved ones, we feel bad for the family. But for me, I felt like this isn't his death. This is some wake-up call for my temporality. You know what I mean? Ever have that experience? Ever have that experience where someone you love dies, and all of a sudden you're like, wow, I was just talking to them yesterday. That could have been me.
We
What about
literally were just talking about this as you came on. There's a woman here in our town who's been the town clerk for like 35 years. I knew her prior to that at the school that I went to, the little school I went to. She was like the headmaster's assistant. She found out in January she had pancreatic cancer and just died March 10th. And we were just at the memorial service.
wow?
And it's just the type of person, you know, in your small town, everybody knows her because when they go to the town hall, they have to deal with her.
Right.
And you sit there going, I mean, I literally just said this to Derek. You know, you get to a point where you're like, wow, there's only so many sunsets left.
It's great to count back that way because usually
right? And you're like,
it's
fuck,
like
man.
one of those geometry graphs with an arrow. Like I was born on January 11th, 1966, and I'm going this way. But no, that line has a beginning and a definitive end. And so when you start counting backwards, these are all like tricks of the great yogis, which is meditating on the temporality of existence. And it's not to get us depressed and down in the dumps and all goth and emo. It's to make us really not waste any more time because life is really short. What is important? What do I want to accomplish? What is my life dedicated to? What do I want to leave as a legacy? What do I want to give my children? That, you know, it starts making us think of the important instead of focusing on the petty. It's like I've been majoring in minor things my entire life. This is a wake-up call. And so when I was 22, I took that as a very loud clarion call to just sort of like to sort of wake up. And so I had to just like cut myself out of my world. And that's what I did. And
do you think your dad's freedom in some ways kind of from a spiritual sense just gave you you know, kind of allow you to just go be free, go figure out your thing, go let go, just do you, you know?
You know, it was a that's how in spirituality I feel like tragedies turn in wonderful, and that tragedy was it actually gave me permission, and it gave me not permission but a kick in the pants. Like, now you go. And it's interesting because he happened to leave on a holy day, and in the Vedic lunar calendar, and I had repeated dreams about him that he was dressed as a monk, encouraging me as a monk. And those lasted for like a year and a half, and then they sort of faded. And so anyway, yeah, I do feel like that was sometimes those tragic things are blessings or they're impetuses. And even to this day, when I hear about these so-called tragedies of loved ones dying or getting chronic sickness, and instead of just my heart going out in pain, realizing like, duh, that's you, dum-dum. That's you about to die. Don't you get it? Stop feeling sad for everybody else. Take your life seriously.
Use what you got there. Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So you're in your early 20s when that happens. You know, in the book, you know, you journey into India, I think a couple times in the book, right? There's a few visits back and forth to India. Yeah. You know, throughout your trips to India, I think there was like some sense of affirmation and then some sense of like, there's no way I could live in an ashram. There's no way I could be doing this. And so it sounds like, you know, you're still like anyone would, is figuring out your way within the path, not necessarily going backwards, just figuring kind of how you go down the path.
Well,
right?
It's dealing with the mind. And the mind is sometimes like, this is the best. And the mind is like, this is the worst. I got to get the hell out of here. So yeah, it wasn't like I was, in one sense I had strong conviction and realization, but I also had a crazy mind that didn't want to renounce the things of this world, that didn't want to give up the comforts of this world, that wanted some type of, you know, living, whatever, doing whatever I do. It takes a special person who can just be very disciplined, you know, and I wasn't disciplined. I did whatever I wanted to up till that point. But the more I went forward, the more it appealed to me. And, you know, I wasn't in the ashram my whole life, but I was in for 6.5 years. And in that 6.5 years, that was my university. That's what that was my education.
I think what's amazing though, Ray, too, is that you weren't alone in this. I mean, Derek and I are big music fans. We had Hari Kirtana Das on a couple of weeks ago, and he was in that music scene with you. I don't know if you know him.
Wait,
but
Hari Kirtan Das?
Yes.
He wasn't in that music scene.
No, he wasn't in that. Go ahead, Larry.
He's like
Well,
15 years older than me.
Yes.
But he knew of it. I think his current wife or someone was attached to that scene somehow. And I said in the interview, I said, I've been a music fan I grew up in New York until about 81, 82. We moved up here to Connecticut. I know the New York you're talking about. But I didn't know that there was this Krishna core scene, this hardcore scene there. And I think what's amazing, is that was happening. I'm curious to know why. And B, I think it's cool that you weren't alone. You had, even in the book, you talk about doing a lot of this stuff with your friends, going to the ashram with your friends who are in the scene or in your band. I could only imagine if you didn't have that, it would feel really lonely, particularly at that time, like you say, with the confluence of all these things going on in the city at the time and being a teenager.
Yeah. It was a little bit of both. I think after my next band started, Shelter, it became big within that whole Krishna core scene. Like Shelter was very influential. People from all over the world, from Indonesia to South America, all over Europe, got into Bhakti culture, Krishna culture, and it became like a phenomenon. Otherwise, like in the 60s and the 70s, it was like a, it's interesting. If you study Eastern teachings that came to America, I was just talking to my friend today about, Rudolf Steiner and the Waldorf schools. And, Steiner was a student of Madame Blavatsky, who came in, the 20s or something. And she was sort of a Russian mystic, Christian mystic, but they got real influence from the Bhagavad Gita. And she was the one who chose, what's his name? I can't think of his name. Oh, Krishnamurti. When Krishnamurti was a young boy, Madame Blavatsky said, "This is the second coming of Jesus, this kid." And that's when Rudolf Steiner was like, "This is nonsense." And he left and he started his own thing, anthroposophy, which became Waldorf schools, which went on to do biodynamic farm. They created biodynamic farming. He had a whole thing. He was a great follower of Goethe, one of the great thinkers of Europe. And so generally, a lot of these yogis that would come to the West, I just found out that there was a famous in Nyack, New York, where in the turn of the century, I think there was a giant ashram as well on some farm too. But it was really for the wealthy women of like the
intellectual kind of, this is how you fill your afternoon.
They want to dabble into foreign Eastern spirituality. And it wasn't until the 60s when Prabhupada came, the Krishna guru, he came to the Lower East Side. And all of his followers, like these hippies and beatniks,
interesting.
What's his name?
Ginsberg.
Allen Ginsberg was a huge fan of Prabhupada. The Grateful Dead, Bob Dylan, of course, George Harrison. They all became interested in Prabhupada and Bhakti and Kirtan and stuff like that. So that sort of, and it blended into the Lower East Side, which was the funky. Every city's got one of those. The Haight-Ashbury, South Street in Philadelphia, the funky, weird part of town. Kreuzberg in Berlin, the funky, weird, punky, hippie part of town.
Yep.
And so that's where hardcore started. So I was there maybe 1970. Think about it. Prabhupada was there in 77. He left his body in 77. So I was there hanging out in 1981. I was a few years away from Prabhupada. And from the origins of the whole international society, which was started on 2nd Avenue and, right around the corner from CBGB's, which was our punk club. And so it was a really peculiar time. So you see Krishna people, because part of Hindu, not just Krishna stuff, but all Hindu traditions is I think I mentioned this when I was on Joe Rogan, is the idea you grow food, you harvest food, you cook food, and you offer food to God. So everything's done with loving intentions, and then you distribute that. And that food is called prasad, or food cooked with the intention of love as an offering. And they say by eating that food, you're imbibing the energy of the chef. And so any holy city in India, even today, you will not go hungry, because you walk by temples and they're just giving prasad all day long. You can eat. You don't even have to pay for food. You just eat. And sometimes it's better than what you're going to get at some restaurant in India. Often it is. So this is just a very common thing. So part of the Hare Krishna's mission is to give free food, not for the homeless and not for the wealthy, just because they feel like everyone has this dearth of love of God in their heart. So it's given in the same way a mother cooks or father gives food to their children with love. And it's different than getting fast food. So the same sense, there used to be these Krishna monks who used to give out food in Tompkins Square Park. And in 1981, 82, 83, that place was serious ghetto, total ghetto. But they used to give it out. And of course, all the punk kids used to eat it. So there was always some punk kids. And at that time, there was a punk gang called the Cro-Mags. And they were a gang before they were a band. And later they became a band. And they were, filled with, I think Harley, the bass player for the Cro-Mags, just a documentary just came out about him. Mm-hmm. He's just like this kid who grew up on the streets of New York. Sort of like, just like getting his ass kicked every day by gangs of Puerto Ricans and Hondurans that lived in that neighborhood. And then finally he snapped. He became violent. He started a whole gang. But somehow they got connected to Indian spirituality just from taking that food. And I think he had such a traumatic childhood that he could never shake a lot of those bad habits, maybe until this day. But he did inspire a lot of people. He did inspire a lot of people, including myself. Now, I came from a good family. I came from a Connecticut, good family, Italian mother and father, 7 kids, Catholic. And for me, I didn't have a traumatic upbringing. So for me, I was already straight edge. I didn't have problems with drugs. I didn't have problems with violence. I didn't have any of those problems. So for me, when I heard about Indian spirituality, I was like, yeah, this makes so much sense. This is such a deeper well than what I understand of God. Not that I hated my spiritual path, but I just felt like this is the thread that ties all these pearls of wisdom together. Yeah,
there was a scene in the book early on where there was this messy Lower East Side, maybe the CBGBs, there was some place you were like, people are doing drugs, they're having sex in the bathrooms. It's just a dirty, gross scene here. And you're like, what am I doing? Like, this is not for me. So it makes a lot of sense how the Krishna Bhakti path kind of caught your eye. Yeah. Let me fast forward a little bit. Ultimately, how would you say when you have kind of fully found your sense of self and commitment into this path? Like, I know it sounds like most of your 20s, you were kind of finding your way. Tell us when you kind of landed and how that took you to where you are and what you're doing now.
That's a good question. So sometimes when you're going in as a monk, in one sense, you're like a soldier. You're getting trained and you're getting educated, and you're trying to make things that are sort of foreign normal now. Just like a crazy teenager grows up and he joins the army, and you got to figure out how to, like, now I got to stand at attention. Now I got to wake up early. Now I got to, make my bed.
Got to change your life entirely.
I got to make my bed, or I got to do 50 push-ups. So it was the same way. It's almost like getting trained like in like a spiritual army. So in one sense, I got committed to that, but it wasn't until I took that information and integrated it into my life outside of the ashram where I feel like I sort of can find myself, because I will say I'm a pretty good person with strict rules. But it's when there's no more rules, feeling out what I can apply to the world and not that. It's sort of like a balancing act. Like when I left the ashram, trying to figure like, well, how do I take that and incorporate it into my life now? And so that was it took me a while to get my balance there. Because you don't want to be too strict or you won't be able to function in the world. But if you don't have any values anymore that you learned, or these ethics or principles or lifestyles you learn, then you end up falling back into your bad habits that you thought were over with, but they're still there deeper. And so I think it took me probably over a decade to find that middle path. And then I start getting attracted. See, I always did yoga before I lived in an ashram, during the ashram, and then when I got very serious about it when I was a little older, like 28.
Is this the Shivananda ashram in New York?
Well, I did yoga with Dharma, with yoga in New York City. I've also been to Shivananda Integral Yoga. These are the old ashram places in New York. And then I started doing Ashtanga Ashtanga yoga. And I did that for about 6 years.
And so the physical practice, you were just referring to your handstands and all that. So you clearly had a connection to the physical practice as well.
Yeah, I had a connection to the physical practice before I moved into an ashram. I always had a connection. But to me, yeah, I started making it after I moved out of the ashram. Then I got very physical. I started wanting to understand yoga, how those first swamis taught it in the West. And yeah.
And what was your understanding of how they first taught it in the West?
Well, it was interesting because at that point, I think I was trying to hear, because in the Bhakti ashram, it wasn't a lot of ashrams in India don't teach asanas. They teach various types of meditational practices. And only a certain percentage teach asanas, because asanas would be like the very ground floor of a spiritual practice. But there's lineages that they feel like it's very ground floor, like you don't even have to do that floor, So it wasn't perpetuated in the Bhakti ashrams. I just practiced it because I always practiced it and I liked being healthy. So what was your question again? Sorry.
What you sort of understood. You said you wanted to understand more what those first swamis were teaching.
Yeah. So, the more I studied what they taught, it was interesting. I was sort of trying to like separate myself from the Bhakti path and try to think, well, let's hear what these guys taught. But the more I studied what they taught, the more I realized like they're saying the same thing Prabhupada said, the Krishna Swami, but they're just saying it bad. They're just not explaining it well. Like if you've ever read, I mean, it's not at least the way I heard it. When I first read Pattabhi Joyce's book, Yoga Mala, I was like, it was just a poor explanation of brahmachari, what a brahmachari means. And a poor explanation of, there was a bunch of things I circled. That makes no sense. Who's going to understand this? It's vague. And you see actually.
And he didn't speak English, did he? Like he also probably didn't think about how to communicate it, right?
Yeah. I mean, he spoke English, but probably not great. And also, I don't think he was teaching Ashtanga. I don't think he was teaching the 8 limbs of yoga to most people. He was teaching some minimal breath work and asanas every day. He wasn't teaching all the facets of yoga, or at least his disciples or early students didn't. They taught, you sit in there and do. And I'm not saying there's not benefit of doing that Ashtanga sequence, but then again, you're dealing with this entire Ashtanga sequence, which was, from what I understand, made for the children of the Mysore Palace, which is you give yoga asanas prescribed like Ayurvedic medicine. Like I would give you some asanas different than what I'd give you, different than what I'd give an 80-year-old woman, different what I'd give a 15-year-old boy or a 9-year-old boy, just like I have kids. So, my kids I don't know if you have kids, but when they're young, you just like.
We do.
They're exhausting. Children are exhausting. So I'm like, okay, kids, here's what we're going to do. You're going to go run and touch that tree as fast as you can. Ready? Go. And come back and tag me. First one back wins. I won. And she's like, okay, we're going to do it again. Who's going to be the fastest? And you run those kids like animals. You just run them till they're exhausted. Otherwise, it's just like becomes overwhelming, the energy they have. So it makes sense that you're going to give a bunch of children very strong asana practice compared to what you're giving a 65-year-old man or woman, maybe who's never exercised, or a 65-year-old woman who was a dancer, or was, or someone who's got scoliosis. So I think Krishna Yamacharya, Pattabhi Joyce's guru, Iyengar's guru, he gave things more specifically. And I think I mentioned in the book,
which is kind of what's wild about having a yoga practice and thinking that you can adapt it for what your needs are. Obviously it helps getting some a foundation and learning about asana and breath work, but the ability to curate it to how you're feeling or what you need and how that complements your own fitness, your own physical therapy, or your own weight work or training, as much as it seems like a bastardized Western kind of remake, it really kind of works.
It does work. But here's the deal. Nobody breathes. Nobody breathes. We've lost connection with breathing. Nobody moves their body. If we do move our body, it's like up and down, punching, lifting weights, it's like we're not using our whole body. And therefore, even though everybody's doing the same class and they're doing the same poses and the risk of hurting some people who shouldn't be doing those poses, the greater feeling they get from moving and breathing in a non-competitive atmosphere, because hopefully the teacher is setting up that type of atmosphere, they're getting so much more benefit than they were than perhaps if they were signing up for a pickup game of basketball or going to CrossFit or doing it. Really, yoga really complements everything. And for me, who is 29 years old and had tons of Rajasic energy, Ashtanga yoga worked great for me. It worked really good with my body, and that with some simple modifications of a strap. Some born again Ashtangis do not like use straps or any props whatsoever. But
bolsters, blocks, right?
Yeah, but with some straps or bolsters or things like that, I found it was incredibly wonderful that I wasn't just cramming my body or cramming my.
You can really dial into what you're edge you're looking for,
Yeah, and that's what I really enjoyed about the Ashtanga practice and the community I practiced with.
Can we just jump back a little bit? You're talking about, is it prasad, the food, making the food, serving the food, right, with love and all that kind of stuff. In the episode I was listening to today, and I'm in the early episodes of Wisdom of the Sages.
Oh, that's exciting.
Like first 6 or 8 episodes, somewhere in there.
It gets good. We go through the pandemic.
It's
we go through
right
George Floyd. We go through. We go through a divorce. We go through.
Oh my God!
It's a whole thing. If you're listening,
it's a whole journey.
Yeah, it's a journey.
In this particular one, in the early ones you did as well, but in this particular one, you were really talking about serving. The idea of serving. Is that part of the prasad thing? And can you talk a little bit more about serving and service and how, as people are getting into yoga, where you can start to manifest some of that service? What does that look like?
Sure. That's a great question. Yeah, you'll see this as a common recurring phrase of this idea of seva or service, because the idea is that material consciousness means I want to be the center. And spiritual consciousness is I want to serve the center. I am not the center. I'm here to serve the center. And so it's one of these things that it's an unreal desire that we have, that I am the center. It's not real. I'm not the center. And I try to create a world where people look up to me or people worship me or my kids say, Dad, you're the best. But the fact is, in reality, I'm not the center, and I'm going to die someday, and life is still going to go on, and no one's going to really care. And they'll think, oh, Raghu died. But then they'll forget and go right back to work, and they'll go back on their cell phones, and they'll be cutting jokes at my funeral. You know what I mean? In a moment, they'll be like, hey, what's for dinner around here? So it's one of these things that this concept, which is empowered by the ego, I am the center, and I'm looking for people to endorse that illusion. That's what the yoga system is meant to crack.
Mm-hmm.
And that comes, and that starts, the very beginning, and the goal is seva. And bhakti means seva, loving service to source, to God, however you want to call God. In Krishna bhakti, we say Krishna is God, or Ram bhakti or Vishnu bhakti. But the idea is loving service, and that is done in so many different ways. It can be done through work. It can be done through, resources. It can be done through song. It can be done through cooking. It can be done through meditation. It's all a type of save. It can be done through a podcast that we do in the morning. Our podcast we consider a type of service. And what's that service? We are spreading the message of the Srimad Bhagavatam, or the message of the Vedas. And we're doing it by reciting it, and people listen, and then people ask questions, and it goes back and forth. And that dialectic has been going on since before recorded time. The entire Srimad Bhagavatam and these stories you hear, they're questions and answers that have gone on since before recorded time. And I say before recorded time because they say that all of the teachings of the Vedas were recorded at a certain point, but before that they just existed within sound. They say that recording things by writing things down, that was only when this age that we live in started, in Kali Yuga, they say. Before that, people just they were called Shrutidar. They just heard and remembered, and they held in their minds. And the question about who am I, why am I here, between teacher and student, that always existed. It was just only in sound. It was only about 5,000 years ago, at the beginning of this age, that the seers or the sages realized, in this age, people are getting dumber. You're seeing Dumb and Dumber? That's us.
Yeah.
We're dumb and dumber. And you can tell by the sophistication of the people and the unsteadiness and the sadness of the minds. The minds are very disturbed, they say, in this age. And so they realize that people won't even be able to remember things. And so, I mean, you meet people like this, sometimes intellectuals. They can read something and then they say, well, what did you read? And they'll tell everything back, what they just read. If you ask me what I just read and I could have just read it, I'll be like, I don't know. And you'd be like, what do you mean you just read it? I was like, yeah, no, I can't retain it. I couldn't retain it. So this is a symptom of Kali Yuga, is you can't even remember what you did yesterday, practically speaking.
So
yeah.
I was going to say, I want to hit this a little bit differently, but on that same point as Seva. You have a section in your book, there's a couple lines where it says, the entire universe works in your favor.
Yeah.
If you are doing good for the universe will do good for you. And I think this is like a probably a more accessible pitch for why people should be thinking about service, in the fact of, like, it's actually going to help you feel better, to be better, to act better. And this kind of bends back to, our intentions with this podcast. We want to get more guys into yoga.
Sure.
Why? Because we think yoga is a great entry point for taking care of your stuff. Whether it's your physical stuff, your mental stuff, or spiritual or vocational. And we think there's a lot of guys at midlife who are starting to get crushed by raising kids, dying parents, flatlining careers, a little more salt in the beard, or whatever it is. And I think they look to the wrong places for figuring out their stuff. And or they're not even looking at all, or they resist the help of someone to help them find what they might need to fill that God-shaped hole in their heart.
Well, they don't know where to look.
They don't know where to look. But Larry and I have both been doing yoga for about over 20 years in our own different ways. We're super into it. We're passionate about it. We're curious about it, and we want other guys to find the spark. And so I want to shift it back to the connection of getting into yoga to take care of yourself, and getting into yoga to start to get off of the smartphone, to the matrix, the connected world, and trying to maybe trip into some kind of spiritual thing. Where's that little scratch that they can start to itch that moves into spirituality?
Sure. Yeah, you know what? I should have presented. I should have had you do the podcast because I really I think you presented it better than I just presented it. This idea of Seva.
Impossible.
No, really. I think I came off too philosophical and too deep. But yeah, your point is really good. Do it for you. Do it for you. Create some time in your day to notice your body, move your body, breathe, and magic starts to happen. And if you have a spiritual inclination, just make that a certain intention or prayer in the morning, like, I need more spirit in my life. If there is a God out there, if there is spirit out there, please lead me, please direct me, please instruct me. And then magic starts to happen. When you start to see yourself as, you know what, I've just been running a role. I've been running these programs like the same one my father did, the same way the grandfather did. And you know what, I want to try something different. And to the degree that we sort of ask these questions, different doors open, different books come into our life, different teachers come into our life, different yoga teachers come into our life. And sometimes they hit us so hard that it just makes us pivot. And in that pivot, I find a whole new trajectory of where I can go. And that pivot, 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, I become a whole different person. So yeah, just the desire to say, you know what, I'm going to do good in this world. And it's going to start with taking care of my body, taking care of what I put in my mouth, taking care of what I put in my ears, taking care of what I put in my eyes, taking care of the media that I'm consuming on a regular basis. Because you're right. There's a lot of people who are just like, you know what, I'm just cannot deal with this time of my life. So I'm going to medicate it. I'm going to zone out. I'm going to drink a few beers. I'm going to just watch Netflix. I'm going to, in worst case, go and get into porn or, to satisfy something. And none of it actually satisfies anyway. But when you learn to control the senses, control the mind, and dial in that you actually have a higher purpose, and that aging becomes graceful and beautiful instead of like a curse, then the whole yoga system starts to make sense and the whole thing starts to blossom. And yeah, I like the way you presented it better than me. Thank you.
Well, no, I Larry, do you want to jump? Larry, do you want to jump in here?
Well, I mean, yeah, I got a lot, but one of the things I've wanted to ask you is, and it's not as deep as Derek just went, but can you just, for me, play out for me where the Bhagavatam sits and the Bhagavad Gita sits? How do those two things go together? Just so I understand.
That's good call. Well, there's like basically three major epics in India. There's a lot of books in India. It's like canons and canons of metaphysical literature. It's sort of mind blowing. But there's three major epics that everybody knows, and that one is the story of Ram, and that's called the Ramayana. And they say it's from another age. They say it's millennia old, even though some academics will say, no, it was penned at this time. But according to the book itself, Ram's appearance was millennia ago in previous ages. Then there's the biggest epic in the world called the Mahabharata, or the Mahabharata. Some people call it the Maha, and that talks about the history of India and all the and how all the emperor. It's sort of one of these great epics filled with like wizard kings and mystic yogis and mystical warriors, and that's the biggest epic in the world. That's 14 times bigger than the Iliad and the Odyssey. That is, and it's a great read, and you really understand the ethics of India up to this day today. Everybody knows, every kid grows up reading the Mahabharata. My kids grew up reading the Mahabharata, but it's been like every kid grows up reading it, and they read it at every phase of their life until they're old men and women. And it's all written in 100,000 Sanskrit couplets. And Maha, of course, means like great, and Bharat is the name of India. India is not a Eastern name. It was a name given by the invaders.
The British.
Actually, at that point, it was the Greeks that gave it the name. It means east of the Sindhu, India. Hindustan, they called it. Like the word Hindu is not an Indian word. There's not a Vedic word of Hindu. That's also it is they're from Bart. They're followers of King Bart. So the Mahabharata is the great dynasty of King Bart. And so those two books, Ramayana, Mahabharata, one of the chapters of the Mahabharata is called the Bhagavad Gita.
Mhm.
So the Bhagavad Gita, that one thin chapter where there's a great fratricidal war, and there's a discussion between the pure devotee and God incarnate.
Mhm.
That's Krishna and Arjuna. That conversation has been studied by all the yoga masters since before recorded time. Again,
Okay. Yep.
And the Srimad Bhagavatam, that's the book we study during our podcast.
Yeah.
That is one of the biggest epics and most read epics, because it has all the stories of the avatars of Vishnu, including the 10th canto. This is 18,000 verses, and that 10th canto has all the stories of Krishna from his appearance till his disappearance. And everybody in India knows, everybody knows all those stories as well. So those three books are the biggest, and they all weave in and out of, like the Bhagavatam, Srimad Bhagavatam has stories of Lord Ram, has stories of Krishna, has stories of Vishnu and previous incarnations, and they all can be woven together like in a fabric, because philosophically they all come to the same conclusion.
Got it. Thank you. I'm gonna, Derek, I'm gonna start steering it around to that part in the book we talked about.
Sure.
If that's okay, if we're getting close to that. So, Ray, in the book, in the story of your thing, you talk about this night after a show where you are getting your ass kicked, basically.
Up in Buffalo?
Yes.
Good old Buffalo.
It's a typical Saturday night in Buffalo.
Yeah. And I'll let you set it up after this question, but basically you're getting your ass kicked, you start chanting, and you're accepting to some degree that you may die. One of the pieces that I wanted to ask in that whole thing that you didn't hit was, how did you feel toward the guys or the group that was kicking your ass?
Oh, that's a great question.
Did you,
let's set it up right, because you open the book with this story, and then you hit it back later in your path.
So it was a time that I'll just tell it briefly. I tell it on Rich Roll, and Rich Roll asked me to tell it because he heard it on Joe Rogan. But I'll tell it briefly here. We were in a band. We were all monks, but we started a band that was all monks, and they were called Shelter. And Shelter was on tour, and we started becoming more popular than Youth of Today, which is the band I quit. I gave it up and became a regular old monk for 2 years. And then after studying the Bhagavad Gita, which says, don't give up what you're good at, just do what you're good at in a spiritual way. And I was like, okay, that's what we're going to do. We're going to do a punk band with a bunch of monks in the ashram. And we got big, and we started another record label, and in the ashram. And it was probably the first time historically that there was a celibate rock and roll band in the world. And so it was a great show. Everything was wonderful. The place was packed. We were headlining in some ghetto warehouse. And after the show, when everything was breaking down, a gang of just thugs came out, and they started kicking the crap out of people. And it was, the kids that went to these shows between 15, 25, and these guys were just serious, serious thugs. And so anyway, they came up to me, and we just said, what? It was almost eerie in the sense we were parked inside the club. They blocked us in with their car, and they got out. The guy put his hand on a gun and just said, I got a gun, and everybody's going to die tonight. And I was just it was so grim. And it was just sort of okay, I'm a monk. I study this stuff every day, the temporality of existence. And I was just all right, we're going to die. We're going to die. And so all the guys within the band were a little younger than me, and our roadies. And so they were like, well, Raghunath, what are we going to do? And I was like, we're going to die. What do you mean, what are we going to do? We're going to die tonight. I was just
the man just said it. The man just said it.
Yeah.
I was I don't know where I got this from, because it's not like I'm very composed, and I'm not very spiritually advanced, but I went into the van, pulled out one of those clay Indian drums, and we got in a circle and we started chanting. And they just beat the hell out of everybody around us. People say now, well, why didn't you run? Why didn't you fight back? Why didn't you? I don't know why we didn't, but we didn't. We just chanted. But then they approached us, and all the guys in the band ran in all different directions, and they surrounded me. And I'm still holding this drum, and I reach back, and the guy reached for his gun, and he just goes, "Do you want some?" And I was just like, "What do I do here?" I was like, "This guy's towering above me. He's completely ripped, you know." And I just put my hands in prayer and just said, "Hare Krishna. I am a devotee of Lord Krishna, and I have no idea why you're so upset." And I just sort of made that declaration. I'm a devotee of Krishna. I'm a devotee of God. And I don't know what can I say to pacify you, but that's all I could say. And all of a sudden, I just felt, for the first time in my life, completely helpless, just like at the mercy of a bunch of fists getting pounded in my face. Yeah, it was really a hopeless situation. Now, the interesting thing was, and this is the interesting thing about Bhakti, because in the Bhakti path, we work towards our devotion in our song, in our prayer, in our meditation, in our offerings, in our Seva. It's like we're working towards it. But it's not like just a long ladder I have to climb. The idea is that we are reaching up and God is reaching down. It's not like we're just reaching up, because there are some yogic disciplines where you have to raise the kundalini. You got to do the work. You have to be completely fit. You have to be completely sober. You have to isolate yourself. You can't let your mind go anywhere. In Bhakti, it's not like that. Bhakti is we become dependent like a child, and we just cry. And so when we cook, when we pray, when we chant, when we meditate, when we sing in kirtan, it's all like crying. We're crying out like a child would cry for the mother almost. And in that crying, the mother hears. So in one sense, if I tell the story, it makes me sound like I'm this stoic. I'm not. I was crying out. I'm every time I got punched and hit, and eventually hit with baseball bats, I was just calling, "Oh Krishna, hey Krishna," and I was calling different, "Oh Govinda, oh Chaitanya," and I'm just calling these different mantras out. And no, to answer your question, I wasn't hateful, and I wasn't even scared. Matter of fact, going through my mind was, "Oh wow, I'm going to leave my body, and I'm chanting." This is what great yogis, this is what they dream of. They dream of leaving their body and just chanting. Like that is like the goal of life. So I was actually, it sounds almost unreal. And it wasn't because I'm a spiritually evolved being. It was, I felt like I was given some glimpse of what being evolved will feel like, where you actually feel like I'm fearless. Because that fearlessness, usually we talk about fearless and we throw that word around like I'm just going to jump off this cliff into a river. I don't care. It's crazy. I'm going to do it. I'm just going to paraglide. That's not fearless. That's just like talking yourself into, precarious situations. Sometimes it's, not no fear. It's like no brains. But real fearlessness comes at an advanced part of yoga where you completely understand that you can't die. That all you do is change bodies. And that you will never, they cannot catch the soul. They cannot catch the subtle body. They could just shoot your body, shoot your gross body. But nothing will happen to you. Boom! You'll still be there, witnessing.
Yeah, this is interesting on two levels. One is not being afraid of death, in seeing it as a part of the process of life. The other part of it is sort of, I think, more in the material aspects is not being afraid of whatever your ego thinks you need to be in your career, in your life, and whoever you are. And I think, there's a dying of the self when you're able to just let go of certain things in your life that didn't quite work out the way you thought it would, or there was some disastrous thing in your life that, shifted your universe. And I think if you have a spiritual, approach and perspective, you see these, you see these, you see these sort of implosions as really blessings, like a little supernova in your world where all of a sudden something comes out of that change in energy.
Well, I will say that was the most blessed night of my life because it made me realize, like, oh, this God thing is real. Like, God entered my mind in a tragic situation. I was fearless in that tragic situation. And not because I was some great Mahatma, because there was some special mercy I was getting at that moment. It gave me more faith in anything that I was doing. If anything ever goaded me forward, it was that. But yeah, you mentioned this idea of the death of the self. I think we'd call it the death of the fake self, because there's a fake self that thinks, I am my career, I am my good looks, I am my charisma, I am my bank balance, I am the car I drive. We're not any of those things. And I think part of our spiritual journey is we witness those things crack. I witness my crow's feet or my beyond a salt and pepper beard. I got a full on white sea foam beard.
It's just a little bit of pepper. You just got a little pepper, a little seasoning up there.
I'm like a salt mine. But the idea is, it cracks that false identity. And so all we're left with is our real identity. And so what is the real identity? And then we go back to what in Svadhyaya, this part of yoga where it's called self-study. Self-study doesn't mean I just look at my hand. It means I try to see myself through the lens of the sacred literature. So the sacred literature says, what are you? What are you? You're a pure spirit soul that's covered in a mind, it's covered in an ego, and it's covered in a type of intelligence, and then it's covered over in 5 gross elements: earth, water, fire, air, ether, those gross elements. But you're none of those things. You're not even your mind or your intelligence or your ego. You are a pure spirit soul, and you're wearing a suit of clothing. And that's the suit of clothing you're wearing in this lifetime. And your real happiness doesn't come from validation of this material world. Your happiness comes from connecting with Source. Don't forget that. You forgot. And the process of yoga is to remember what you forgot. You thought you were this Italian, New York, punk, Lower East Side kid. That's not you. That's over. That's a dream of the soul. Reality is you're a pure spirit soul, and your bright light is covered over by layers of egos, layers of false selves, layers of false identities, layers of misconceptions. In the same way, if you take a bright street lamp and you put layers of blankets over it, eventually it just dims that light. So the yoga process, if we're doing it right, is peeling off the layers. So there is nothing left. There is no false conception of self. That self must die.
Is this what you mean when you talk about the culture of the soul?
Yeah, exactly. There is a culture of the soul in the same way there's a culture of Italian New Yorkers. You know what I mean? There's a culture of Italian New Yorkers, the way they talk, the way they do for enjoyment, the way they act, the way they behave around their family during holidays. There's a culture of the soul.
So how, Ray, for 2 guys, I've got a son who's 9.5. Derek's a new dad, basically, not 9 months in. And for the other guys and dads listening who are husbands and sons and fathers and all that, on a practical day-to-day level, man, how do you do it?
How do I raise kids?
How do you raise kids? How do you maintain this?
How do you be the soul of Ray or the spirit of Ray?
Yeah, how do you
without losing your stuff? Like, how do you not,
man?
You can't make the kids run back and forth all day long. You know, you got to feed them, right?
You can try, dude. But yeah, how do you deal with the annoying IRS notice, or that your calcium CAT scan score is way beyond what it should be right now, which I just found out yesterday, right? Like,
yes.
How do you maintain?
Well, everybody's coming into some. If people are interested in spiritual information, they got into it at different times of their life as well. I got into it when I was a young man, before I was married, before I had a girlfriend, So for me, that was sort of like my education. And then to how to carry that into a romantic relationship, a marriage, having children, once you get married and have kids, it's a complete distraction it can be a complete distraction. Why? Well, you got soccer, you got the IRS, you got your own health concerns, you got to pay for the mortgage, you got to, worry about parking the car on which side of the road, different times of the day. You got to clean out the garage on Saturday. You just get bogged down by stuff, and you can really neglect yourself, not just your health, not just your mind, but you can neglect the soul. So, the beautiful thing is, all of us, wherever you're at, whether you got into this when you were 15, where you're born into some spiritual thing, or you got into it when you're 65, the best time to plant an avocado tree is about 10 years ago. The second best time is today. So wherever you're at, you got to work with what you got. And to the degree that you work on yourself, everybody in your universe will benefit. Your children will benefit, your spouse will benefit, your friends will benefit, your workplace will benefit. Everything will benefit. But the focus has to be, how can I give genuine self-care? That just doesn't mean like a massage, but it means I've got to start understanding what I am. I'm the physical body. Yeah, that's true. I've neglected that. I've got to get into my breathing, but I have to understand what the soul is and how am I going to incorporate that into my life. So it's going to be different for everybody. It's not like a one size fits all.
Mm-hmm.
But a meditational practice is super important. Even if you have like 5 minutes in the morning and 5 minutes in the evening, that can be done. And it's something, if I was to give that to somebody, it'd be unique. It'd be prescribed. Like I wouldn't give the same medicine to the same to different people, because people have different bodies and different constitutions. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
You got to add something. You got to add something. You don't even have to give up anything yet, but you got to add something.
Right. How would you recommend or suggest beginning to pass on some of this stuff to your young children? Right. It's one thing to, for example, I teach as well. It's one thing to invite my 9.5-year-old to come hang out in the back of the class, do what you can on your mat, blah, blah, blah. Okay. But the bigger picture stuff, what's a good way to include them in it and pass on some things?
It depends what part of the culture of yoga you want to give. If you want to give movement, they come to a yoga class. With my kids, I gave them kirtan, music.
Mm.
And I started bringing them to India when they were little children. And that became part of their normal. Like holy rivers, holy places, holy people, holy food, sacred places. It just became the new normal. And then I got this farm about 11 years ago. We started doing different types of kirtan yoga retreats here. And that just became normal also. So I'm not saying do that either. Take your kid to India every year, although you could. I've had people take their kids to India, and it has a deep, lasting effect on them in a lot of ways sometimes. But truthfully, I won't even get into it, except once you start to figure out, I want to imbibe a spiritual life, a yogic life, a deep well of spiritual information. Once I decide on it myself, the universe is going to start to instruct how to take care of the kids as well. It'll just happen. And it's not a one size fits all, because kids are different too. Some kids are really interested in spiritual things, and some kids are like, not interested whatsoever. Sorry. It's just like that. I've seen it happen, with my own kids. I've raised 5 children.
Wow.
Yeah.
Cool.
And some kids are just like drawn to anything yogic. 2 of my sons play the clay drum incredibly, and my daughter paints, and I train them from little kids in ritual and mantras and stuff like that. But you also don't know the seasons of life that kids go through too. Sometimes they just they turn 18 and they just want to do 18-year-old things, or sometimes they get a louder calling than even you got. You'll be surprised. Maybe your kids will be great yoga teachers, great yogis, great sages, they'll want to live in ashrams or dedicate themselves to a spiritual path. You might be getting way over your head right now.
Right.
Careful what you teach those kids.
All right. Exactly. Exactly. You've got the podcast. You're still going strong. Wisdom of the Sages.
Yeah.
You got some
reasonably daily podcast.
Reasonably daily. What's coming up for you? How can people find you? What's the best way to follow Raghunath?
I do a great 200-hour and 300-hour training with some other very empowered teachers. It's like a Bhakti training, but it's 200 hours for 200-hour yoga teachers and 300-hour yoga teachers. That happens in January in India at a really wonderful place. That's on my website, raghunath.yoga, RAGHUNATH. .yoga. And also every autumn, I take a group to India just on a pilgrimage. So we teach yoga, and we also take people to holy places in India. And it's more of an educational trip because we have these conversations like you and I are having right now about the essence of the soul, and we tell these stories of the goddesses and gods of India, and how these stories are relevant, or are they relevant, and what's the relevance of this particular place. And I've been doing that since 2007, taking people to India, and it's a great joy of mine. And it's one of these trips that you think about it every day. You never stop thinking about it. And it's hard to explain to anybody, but sometimes if you follow me on Instagram and just scroll around, you can see the pictures, and they're sort of next level. So I'd say people go to raghunath.yoga or Raghunath, RAGHUNATH, Yogi, Raghunath Yogi on Instagram. And all my links are there. And get my book, Punk to Monk. It's a good story. And if you feel like you're on a spiritual trajectory, it doesn't matter if you were a punk or not. There you go. She's got it.
There it is. There it is.
It's one of those books that I think in anybody's spiritual journey, you tend to find yourself in there. Like, what do I have to do with autobiography of a yogi? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
You see yourself in that story. And because as different as we are, we're also the same in a lot of ways too. We all fall in love. We all get our heart broken. We all get some money. We all lose some money. We're all completely vital and strong. And then we get some sickness and we're not vital and strong. We all pop out a couple kids maybe. You know, it's just like we're very similar historically for millennia. You know what I mean? We have some fear. We have some hope. We have some joy. And then there's higher callings. Will material life satisfy me? We have some anxiety, you know. Yeah. So
this has been great, man.
Thank you. Hope this was good.
Yeah, Ray, thanks for coming out. This has been awesome.
My pleasure.